Hey everybody, Quantum back here again, and it's been a long time since we did a market watch with the upcoming release of Shimmering Skies in just about 4 or 5 days. I figured we'd do just a quick overview of what the market is basically trying to do with a few different cards, what cards might be good going into Shimmering Skies, what cards might be falling off, what do people anticipate the meta to be now that we've had the conclusion of Bologna in Italy, the Disney Lorcana Challenge, what market moves are happening, and we have the DLC in Toronto coming up. Not that that will be too much of an indication because we'll have Shimmering Skies out by then, but let's go ahead and jump in because there's potentially a lot to cover. We'll try to be pretty quick with each one. Starting off, Aiel Spectacular Singer. This is a card that I think will continue to go up unless we get a direct tutor for songs in Amber, which is very unlikely. I think this card remains good for a very long time. I myself picked up my foil playset a little earlier last month in July, now that we're in August. I picked them up for about 15 bucks, still a little bit higher than I would like to pay, but I think, seeing the trajectory of this card and how useful it's going to be in Amber, given that we got some very powerful Amber cards in the next set, I'm pretty happy with that. So if you don't have these and you're looking to play Amber at some point, you might want to pick them up because it looks like they are continuing to rise. I do think that Amber Emerald, Amber Steel, and even Amber Ruby are all potential decks that you could play the Aiel in. Of course, there's a lot of different spin-offs and variations that you could play, but again, Aiel continues to be a very powerful card. Just the ability to scry for a song with being a singer 5 is just incredible value. Next up, you have the Queen's Castle. This is a card that I called spiking up a lot. What I will say is I do anticipate that this card completely falls off because we have a lot of location-based removal coming in the next set in Shimmering Skies. I do think Ruby Amethyst cuts this from their list completely. I could be wrong, or this card, just like before, could make its way back into the deck at some point. But with the introduction of the new Sapphire Cusco and the Steel Simba, both of which can remove locations, I do think that this card becomes much weaker because one of the areas where in the current meta in set 4 there was kind of a triangle where this card really excelled is this card could excel against any Sapphire deck, mainly Sapphire Ruby and Sapphire Steel, and it can also help you clutch out a win and or gain back card advantage against Emerald Steel. So it was a fantastic card, and we saw in DLCs where Ruby Amethyst took 2 in a row that the Queen's Castle was basically the game-winning card in those Ruby Amethyst lists, right? It was winning match after match after match, including the finals match. What you have now is Sapphire decks and Steel decks now being able to easily deal with the Queen's Castle. No more Rise of the Titans needed, potentially. They can actually play a character in order to out it, and obviously Emerald Steel falling off with the errata to Bucky happening. This card becomes much less powerful and much more susceptible to removal, similar to the interaction that we had in set 2 with Spellbook and Benja, right? Where people started to tech in Benja into the Steel lists. The Spellbook became much weaker because, if you played your Spellbook and then it got Benja and your opponent would end with a character that quests for 2, you would just lose the tempo with whatever card you played last turn, getting no value almost out of it, right? So we potentially have that same scenario going on with the Queen's Castle. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but I do anticipate that this card falls out of favor. Still a very powerful card, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as powerful moving forward. That being said, I don't think Amethyst is going away. I think Amethyst is regaining its spot as basically the best color in set 5 potentially. It just looks to be getting really, really strong with the new Elsa and some other tools. But there are definitely some cards that check Amethyst, especially Ruby Amethyst, which is obviously the most powerful iteration of this deck historically in Lorcana so far. But I do think rabbits are going to continue an upward trend. I've called this a long time ago too, where I said as we get further and further away from Rise of the Floodborn, because this was a starter deck card, this card is harder and harder to find, despite it being in a starter deck. So until Lorcana goes over its reprints, this card will continue to rise because it's just a tremendously powerful card. And Merlin is a key character in Disney, right? We just seen the new Sapphire Merlin Visionary, the tutor, the very first tutor we have in the game. A lot of people are high up on Amethyst Sapphire, right? Because it can shift on top of a different number of Merlins in Amethyst, making it very easy to tutor out any cards you want. So I think this card just continues to go up in value. So if you don't have them yet, for about $3 USD, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad price. A lot of people are hyping up on a whole new world because of the new Naine. Why this card and interaction is going to be very powerful is because if your board gets completely wiped as an Amber Steel Song player, you can just play the Naine, then just cast a whole new world for free. You no longer need to have that Singer 5 Aiel or something stick on the board, or Robin Hood Shift, Queen Shift, etc. You can just straight up, okay, you wipe my board, Naine into whole new world, right? And so that can help you regain tempo, reset the board. It can do a lot for you there. So a lot of people are high up on this card. my friend and I have been talking a lot about like potential ban lists coming in the future, and I keep saying that if there was a ban list, this is probably the first card to go or get limited. But if that does happen, it kills two major keystones or cornerstones of Lorcana in Amber Steel Song and even Sapphire Steel, in my opinion. Of course, those decks can adapt, but they really do function around a whole new world. So, always bear in mind that this is one of the most powerful cards in the game. It will remain one of the most powerful cards in the game. It is a massive disruptor. It is a huge tempo swing, tempo disruptor, however you want to phrase it. But if this card continues to be played in the meta, as in it doesn't get rotated out, it does not get banned, it is a card that I anticipate will continue to rise in price. Moving on to Piglet, Pooh Pirate Captain. I picked up 3 foils. I still need 1 more, but this is a card that I'm very high up on because aggro strategies are coming back in set 5, if you don't know. The introduction of the Daisy Duck, the ability for aggro just to run away with the game very, very quickly, mainly even Amber Steel aggro, but mainly Amber Amethyst aggro. It looks to be very, very powerful. There are some decks that will just auto lose to the aggro strategy, especially when aggro is on the play, and Piglet is a key integral part of that, I think. It will remain a key integral part. It's also an amazing Perdita target. It's also a hero, a pirate, and a captain, so it has a ton of synergies going with it, potentially what you pair it with. Like I said, you can pair it with Steel and run the Smee, and this is a pirate to protect the Smee from damage, etc. So this card, I think, just continues to go up. It is a very valuable card. I'm looking for my 4th foil copy to finish my playset for when I want to test out some aggro. Next up, we got Flyn Rider. This card obviously fell off from its pre-release high, but I do think, and I could be wrong on this, but my guess is that this card falls out of favor in Ruby decks, Ruby Amethyst mainly, just because I think it's a little bit too hard for this card to maintain its advantage. People are going to learn to play around it, and I think there are just better utility cards to play that give you more value instead of having to hope that you proc this ability, because Ruby Amethyst no longer has a problem with aggro, right? And if you watch my videos when Ursula's Return first came out, and I said, Ruby Amethyst now loves playing against aggro because they can drop this and drop Cisu or drop any other higher strength character, and aggro, just can't deal with it because you can just keep up with the aggro and then establish your control game later on. Well, Ruby Amethyst no longer needs to do that because they have tools or reintroduction of different tools into the deck, things like that new Elsa and whatnot, that will help you deal with aggro a little bit better, and therefore guarantee you value instead of a Flyn Rider, which could be good in some matchups, bad in some matchups. It doesn't necessarily guarantee you any value, and sometimes you just play a 2-cost character that's a 2/2 body at quest for 1, and it doesn't really do anything else because your opponent is constantly matching you for the strength on board. So while this card was very powerful, was very good, obviously won DLCs in the Lorcana metagame, I do think it falls out of favor in Ruby decks longer term. Zeus is a card that, from what I've seen, nothing has replaced this. This card remains the best steel removal spell, in my opinion, in the game. So I just continue to see this card going up. Nothing else to say there. In all of the lists that I make with steel in the new meta, I'm pretty sure more or less all of them have 4 Zeuses. Like, that's how influential I think this card is, because I'm just like, I just need something that removes stuff, and it always comes down to Zeus, right, when I'm building anything with steel, because I haven't really built a Ruby steel, because that would be a different story, right, with Ruby's direct form of removal. This being damage-based removal continues to be the best option in my opinion. Similar to the Flyn Rider, I do think Cisu may fall off. Now, what I will say is this card remains very powerful even in isolation, and what makes it even more meta relevant than the Flyn was, because obviously the combo was like Flyn on 2, Cisu on 3, and then you hopefully gain the 3 lore, and this is a good body, 4 toughness, quest for 2, hopefully has like 4 or 5 strength on it. But because of that, I do think this card can continue to be played and will continue to be played in certain iterations. What also makes it strong is the fact that it has the Cisu name, because I think that 8-drop Cisu is remarkably powerful and will continue to get more and more powerful as, we've already seen the full set release for set 5, but I do think in the metagame, the 8-drop Cisu to clear 2 strength and less characters remain very powerful, primarily in Ruby Sapphire and Amber Ruby, because I think the ability for those ink pairings to modulate strength in order to get additional value off of the Cisu, big Cisu wipe is very good, and this card facilitating the shift for an earlier board wipe is very strong, and this is just a good card inherently. So I do see the merit for this card remaining in decks, but I think we're getting into an era of Lorcana where we're looking for cards that when you play them, you get some really good value right away. This card doesn't necessarily do that. It has to come down and, you know, like either trade into something, get you some value that way, continue to quest, or actually fulfill its duty as a shift target for you to get value. Similar to the Flyn Rider, right? The Flyn Rider comes down, you have to hope that you get the value out of it. It's not like a guaranteed, I know I'm going to draw a card, I know I'm going to be able to out a threat, etc., right? So I know I'm going to trade 1-for-1, that kind of thing. Next up, we have Grab Your Swords. Similar to Zeus, we still haven't seen really another card in Steel that is as effective as Grab Your Swords. This card, I think, is due to be power crept soon, since it is a Chapter 1 card and we don't really have any other board wiping ability with Steel. I don't know what's going to power creep it, though. My guess is we're going to get a very big character that is a shift, maybe like a 9-cost character that shifts for like 6 or 7 that deals 2 or 3 damage to everything on board. Just something massive. That might be too overpowered, but I think we're warranted for something like that now at this stage in the game, but who knows, we'll see. But yeah, if you don't have your copies of Grab Your Swords and you plan to play Steel, you probably need this, again, just because aggro beyond the Daisy Duck is still going to be a thing, and you just need a way to deal wide damage if you're playing Steel. Prince John is low, surprisingly. Or, you know, it's come back down. The foil versions, ironically enough, have like skyrocketed in price, I believe, because I know I bought some at $6, and like I was looking the other day and they were going for like 18 Canadian, which is kind of crazy. But I do think that this card, if you don't have them and you plan to play Emerald or any form of discard after the Bucky errata, you need Prince John now. I know that the Bucky list in set 4 did not play Prince John, or most of them did not, but this card is quintessential. It is the discard card. This is the card that generates you advantage. This is the card that wins you games if you're playing Emerald. Emerald Amber will be a threat, and Prince John will be a threat. Emerald will be a threat. Emerald Steel discard will be a threat, simply because the new item, Prince John's Mirror, is going to be, in my opinion, pretty meta warping. I could eat my words on that. I could be completely off base, but that card just seems very powerful. And if it sticks for even 1 turn against your opponent, and your opponent has to discard down to 3, especially if you have a Prince John in play, you're drawing off of that discard, and you're also limiting your opponent severely. And if you're on Emerald, you're likely playing a discard package, which means those remaining 3 cards that they pass their turn on, you're likely going to be like, okay, you have forgotten me, Sudden Chill, whatever it might be, to make them discard the rest of their hand. So Prince John as an Emerald card, if you don't have them, I do think this card goes way up in price if we see Emerald continue to be a meta threat with the introduction of Prince John Mirror in set 5. Speaking of Emerald, we don't talk about Bruno. I've talked about this many times already. This is the Emerald card. This is the removal Emerald card, because the goal with Emerald right now is discard, and once you've discarded your opponent's hand, this card becomes removal. You Bruno back whatever target you want. The opponent has nothing in hand, so whatever gets Brunoed back to hand gets discarded right away. This will also trigger the Prince John if you have that in hand, on field, in order to draw a card. So I do think this card at like $1 was really undervalued. The foil ones are going for $5. I picked up my foil set. I think at $1, it's a no-brainer to pick up at least 4 copies of this, because if you ever plan to play Emerald, I think this card is almost an auto-include, at least right now from what we've seen in the first 5 sets. Tinkerbell remains to show her value. She's kind of gone through a bit of a roller coaster, it looks like. But I do think long-term this card will remain to be played, because, again, as aggro becomes a threat in the metagame, one of the things that Steel really has to check aggro is the Tinkerbell. So if you don't have Tinkerbells, getting them for around $10 I think is a pretty decent value. $10 Canadian would be really good value now, I think. I think more or less the price is like 14, 15 Canadian, which is unfortunate, because I do remember when you could have picked up non-foil copies of this for like 10. But I do think if you end up paying like 12 to 14, it's not the end of the world, because I do think if you plan to play Steel, Tinkerbell is always a solid option to include into your deck. Again, with aggro becoming a big threat, I do think Maleficent biding her time has a lot of application, not just in Amber Amethyst, but also in Amethyst Steel, because the new Pete is going to be an absolute force to help protect aggro strategies, particularly the aggro version of Amethyst Steel. So I do think that this card will continue to rise in price, and we've seen Maleficent be a character that gets a lot of attention in this game. There are constant cards being printed with her name. There is a shift target in set 5, but it's not very good, or at least it doesn't look very good from what I've seen. It is a good body and an okay effect, but the effect doesn't really warrant the cost in my opinion. But it is high strength, high willpower, and it still has a decent effect, I guess. But it is a shift target. I do think that Maleficent will continue to get powerful cards into the future. So this is a 1-cost uninkable 1/1 that quests for 2 in Amethyst. It might be worth picking up. I tried picking up foil copies. Unfortunately, I dragged my heels and I missed picking them up for 6 Canadian, and now they're going for like over 10, and I picked up 2 at $10 each. So I overpaid by $4 each compared to what I could have paid for them. But I just wanted the foil playset because I do believe that this card, at least in the foil state, will stabilize at around 10, between 10 and 12. It could even go higher than that, again, if there's more relevant Maleficent cards released. But if you do plan to play aggro with Amethyst, I do think you want some Maleficents. Be Prepared is in a weird spot. We are constantly seeing cards come out that check Be Prepared. Despite that, though, people seem to always go back to playing 3 or 4 Be Prepareds. I do think, though, with the introduction of Pete, it's just another check to the Be Prepared. We have Bare Necessities, we have Ursula Deceiver, we have the new Pete. Now, it's just a lot of things to prevent you from getting board wiped if your opponent plays smart. And we saw in DLCs and Disney Lorcana challenges, players always trying to play through or play around that Be Prepared, right? Snipe it at the right time. Just discard it when they know that they have it, that kind of thing. What's funny is the one that just concluded in Italy, in the finals, the Ruby Sapphire player meant to play, I think, a Maurice's Workshop, and they accidentally revealed the Be Prepared and put that on board instead. They immediately took it back and played the Maurice's Workshop, and the opposing Steel Song player in the finals had a whole new world in his hand, and he had a decent sized board. I think he had like 3 or 4 characters on board, and as soon as he passed back to him, he was holding the whole new world for a few turns. He immediately whole new worlded. He was like, yeah, I'm not going to let you sing that Be Prepared or cast that Be Prepared on me. Unfortunately, the Ruby Sapphire player drew into another Be Prepared, I'm pretty sure, and just was able to wipe the board anyways. But this card continues to represent tremendous value in any Ruby deck. I don't think you ever go wrong playing it. And I think if you play Ruby, you always want to have 4 of these potentially at your disposal to put into your deck. So if you don't have them, you definitely want them. This card, again, a Chapter 1 card, only gets harder and harder to find until a reprint happens. I don't think this card gets banned or limited. I mean, it might get limited. I shouldn't say that. It probably could get semi-limited to like 2 or something. I don't think it warrants going to 1, but I could see in a future list this gets semi-limited. I don't think this card is good enough to be outright banned, unless something changes. Unless we get like a very slow meta where this card is constantly able to be sang, and your opponent can sing it with one of their characters, and then they can maintain tempo that way. Then the card becomes a little bit more broken. But hard casting Be Prepared, I think, is totally fine, because it's a very significant cost for you to basically pass your turn to wipe everything on the field. Kita, I think, is a very undervalued card. The Cold Foil in particular, I've picked up 4 copies now. Yeah, I just bought my 4th one for 15. I do think this is a very good card because I'm very high up on Emerald Amber in particular, but also with aggro strategies, you potentially just hard cast Kita. I don't think in Amber strategies you have enough room to play the Shift Kita any longer, because your 1-drop slots are so competitive with, like, I don't think you really play Lilo too much either, but like the Daisy Duck is in there for sure. But like in aggro strategies, this card coming down and potentially protecting your whole board and just being able to quest for an extra turn is really, really strong. But again, the main application is Emerald Amber discard, where this card is just absolutely insane with the Under the Sea combination. I posted a video on it. It's probably the strongest combo in Lorcana, in my opinion. I might eat my words on that because we just saw what happened with Maurice's Workshop and the Queen Diviner, but I think Kita is really undervalued. Speaking of Queen Diviner, this card is going up, I would anticipate, simply because it just won the DLC. Yep, there you can see the price spike. I was high on this card for a while after I kind of called it underwhelming in comparison to Scuttle pre-set 4 coming out. But you've seen the application of this card, and what's interesting is I was trying to make this work with steel, with bodyguards to protect it, But one of the ways that the Ruby Sapphire player was able to utilize this card very effectively was basically with the Shield of Virtue, being able to ready this back up, right? Because the following the turn that you play this, you'll have all your ink available. You exert it, you look at the top 4, you pay 3, Shield of Virtue, ready it up, tap it again, look at the top 4. You get 2 free items. And if you have a Maurice's Workshop or 2 in play, assuming you have the spare ink, you get additional card draw off of that. This card can help you fish for your Lucky Dimes. This card can help you fish for any other item that's 3 cost or less, like Maui's Fish Hooks, Fortispheres if you're in the Steel version, Popsicles, obviously, Fishbone Quills, other Maurice's Workshops, Great Stone Dragon, you name it. This card can just help you fish for a ton of value, and it's pure card advantage, right? Pure, very powerful card advantage, because similar to how singing songs allows you to bypass the cost of, paying the cost for a song, this card allows you to bypass the cost for an item, but also it doesn't even rip the card from your hand. Like, a song still costs you card advantage from your hand. This card just gets you the free card from your deck. So I do think if you don't have your playset, pick them up. I will probably look at picking up my 4th foil one very soon, just because I just want to have the 4th foil. And going into set 5 and in the future, we're only going to get more and more items, right? So this card likely just becomes better and better over time. And yeah, there's not much else to say. It's a decent card. Madame Medusa is definitely on the decline. This card still represents great value in Ruby. What's interesting is, as generically powerful as Madame Medusa is, I think her strongest suits are still in Amber and Sapphire, where you're able to strength modulate cards in order to make sure that you have 3 strength or less on an opponent's character to banish them. This card will likely still be played in Ruby Amethyst, but I do think that there potentially is some better options now, mainly because this is uninkable. Like, just having the ability to remove threats with, like, the new Elsa in Amethyst, for example, might just say that's good enough and I don't need Madame Medusa. You could be wrong. This card, I think, will always be relevant and always be played to a certain degree, unless it gets directly power crept. It is still a very good card, but it's on the decline. If you're looking at picking these up, you can probably get them for even cheaper, maybe like less than $2 each. This person picked up 4 at $2, for example, $2 USD. So it's an interesting consideration. Fishbone Quill in Sapphire. This is another interesting one. I think that Sapphire is one of the winners out of set 5. A lot of powerful cards come into the Sapphire card pool, mainly in the Donald Duck on 5 for the extra ramp and the new Cusco to help Sapphire deal with locations and items. And so the Fishbone Quill will remain a strategy that Sapphire continues to use, and as a result, this card will continue to maintain and or go up in price, I think. Sapphire is a very powerful ink color, and I think it gets more powerful with Shimmering Skies. Amber cards. So similar to Aiel, I think the Cinderella in certain applications is still really good value. I know we have Ursula Vanessa that can sing 4, which is also very strong considering you compare that with a Zeus on the steel side. But Cinderella singing Let the Storm Rage On, Cinderella singing Strength of a Raging Fire, and continuing to sing any other 3 cost or lower songs as we move further and further into Lorcana's life cycle continues to be a very powerful effect, right? If you think about what Black Lotus is, right, you play it, you get 3 mana instantly, right? This card, yes, you have to wait a turn, and yes, it costs 1, but it allows you to, well, I guess it is isolated, right, to only songs, but it allows you to cast a 3-cost song for free. Well, not for free. You exert this character to cast it. So I'm not trying to make comparisons necessarily directly to Black Lotus, but you can kind of see some of the inherent similarities, right? Like, I get to play a 3-cost card for free. It has to be a song, and yes, you do have to exert this character, but I mean, you're playing a 3-cast song for free, right? It's one of the reasons why Amber Steel Song remains so dominant in metas ever since Chapter 1 or ever since this card was released, right? Especially since Cinderella was released. Maui. Nothing much to say here. Maui will continue to hold value and or go up in value because Ruby remains a very, very powerful color. And Maui will likely always be played in Ruby until something better comes along. Tamatoa, similar to Fishbone Quill, Tamatoa is Sapphire, right? If you're playing Sapphire, you're playing Tamatoa. Not much to say here. This card is insanely strong. I don't think it really gets power crept because it really can't, in my opinion. It can technically get subbed out. Like, you could potentially just play Aerials over the Tamatoas and just gain 5 off Lucky Dime's Quest for 5. But Tamatoa is just insanely explosive, and his abilities are very synergistic with the Sapphire ink color in and of itself, right? Being able to recur items so that you can replay them and draw cards like off Popsicle, and then quest with Hiram and banish them and get them back with Tamatoa, so on and so forth. The Tamatoa just is going to continue to go up in value, I think, because Sapphire I really don't think is going anywhere, and Tamatoa remains an integral part of that. Diablo definitely should be crashing as expected here, simply because, again, the Bucky errata, but this card remains extremely powerful, arguably one of the best cards in the game still, and I do think Emerald will not go away. I think Emerald will be in the meta still. We will see the resurgence of Emerald Amethyst aggro and or control and or discard. I think Emerald Steel discard will still be around in a certain capacity, and I think Emerald Amber will be the de facto Emerald ink pairing moving forward. Could be completely wrong on that, but I just really think that ink pairing is very, very strong. Yes, it does rely on some combos in order to work, but when it does get those combos off, it's almost impossible to lose the game, I think. Like I said, like Kita into Under the Sea, it wipes your opponent's whole board. You likely already have card advantage. You've been discarding their hand. You just wipe their board. That's a game-winning state for you, right? Diablo helps facilitate that, gives you that additional card draw along with Prince John when you discard, along with Rapunzel drawing. I mean, you don't play Rapunzel in that deck, but there's a lot of other things that you can play in order to help you generate advantage. And I think Diablo, coming down in value, it might be a time to pick them up. Not right now maybe, but keep an eye on them and see if they continue to drop and pick them up at a right time. Strength of a Raging Fire, I think, is also potentially on the decline. I do think this card still represents great value because, again, we haven't really seen anything power creep, steal, removal, and what we have right now is probably the best that we have for, at least for this next set until set 6. Cisu Empowered Sibling. Okay, this card has come down quite a bit. I picked up foil copies at $40, so I did overpay because I think they're going for this is what, $33 Canadian. I picked them up for 40 Canadian. I do think that this card is very good, as I explained earlier. And as the Ruby Sapphire player showed in Italy today in the Disney Lorcana Challenge, the 3-drop Cisu that can banish 1 strength or less characters is indeed very relevant. And I really like that card after not being too high on it initially. Just because, again, the best ink pairings for it, and I have lots of deck lists that show the 3-drop Cisu with Amber and with Sapphire. Because, again, it goes back to those strength modulating cards that give you tremendous value to play that Cisu. When you get 2 ice blocks on the field, being able to reduce down anything, more or less, down in the first couple of turns, down to 1 strength so you can banish it with the Cisu. Beyond the fact that the Cisu already has incredible value, banishing things like Hirams and such, and even Rapunzels and stuff when they come down, right? The card is very good. And then having that ability to shift and then wipe anything 2 or less strength, again, with strength modulation, is very powerful. One of the nicest things with Amber is if you have a queen on board and you're able to strength modulate an opponent's character and then shift the Cisu and then wipe out that character with that shifted Cisu, is one of the most satisfying things you can do, because this card likely always goes at least 2 for 1, and you also get a very powerful questing body and a decent strength stat card on board as well. So very interesting to see. Again, this is one of the cards when Ursula's Return first came out, I was not high on this. I thought this card was just going to be completely irrelevant, but how wrong I was. Next up, Grammatala. This is one to watch for the future. It is slightly on the uptrend, but I think there's a couple of ink pairings that could use this moving forward, mainly the Sapphire Amber, if that ever becomes a thing. Because similar to Surfer Stitch being a 4/8 body that draws you to, Grammatala can just come down on turn 5 potentially now, just hard casting it, and you can gain an extra lore every turn, an extra 2 lore every turn, and this card can get harder and harder to out. It doesn't get Zeused, it doesn't get Medusa'd. You have to ice block it down and take it out. It needs double ice block in order to be hit by big Cisu, 3 ice blocks in order to be hit by small Cisu. The Queen can definitely reduce its strength enough so that it can be taken out by anything, obviously, but all in all, the 8 toughness is very, very relevant. Makes it very difficult to out without direct removal. So, decent card. I think it's one to watch. Robin Hood, I think, is going to stabilize at around this price point. I don't think this card really does too much else to show its worth more than what we've already seen. It's good for what it is. It's good as a good shift target, as a singer for what it is. but I think the format is moving to a faster pace, and the slow Robin Hood on 1, not really doing anything, waiting to shift it on 3. Without Bucky in the meta now, this card does lose some value, obviously, because it's one less deck that it's going to be played in. But keep an eye on this. I do think this card goes down over time because I think people are going to be looking for higher impact steel cards to play. But it doesn't mean it's not a good card. This card still remains to be a phenomenal card that will be played. It's just that I think that its high point has come and gone. Mulan is another one to watch. So I'm kind of revealing all my secret sauce. I've already picked up extra foil copies of this because they're super cheap. They're like $1 or $2 more than the regular copies. I think this card has a lot of potential moving into Shimmering Skies. And I can't wait to hopefully show you some gameplay with it. But I know myself, I've picked up some, like I said, some extra copies because the card is like the lowest it's ever been, right? So why not just pick them up if you don't have them? They're only a couple of bucks. Like I just, didn't buy a coffee one day and that pays for a Mulan basically, right? So, I just picked them up. Good to have them in the arsenal because what we've seen is there's more, like I've been talking about, there's more and more strength modulating cards coming out. And this card coming down, either on shift or, and staying on board or just raw casting it, giving it rush or something, that with like the new Cogsworth, the Vitalisphere, etc., is really good value. And being able to boost up the strength, with the Ruby Chromacon, with the Lumiere, with, a Medallion Weight, you name it, makes this card a potential multiple time board wipe. And, to me, that seems very good. It has a number of really good shift targets, actually, especially in the Amber Ink pairing. But there's actually a 3-cost Mulan support character, the 2/3 body that quests for 2. I think it's overlooked, but I'm definitely looking at picking up foil copies of that if I can. Next up, Perdita. This card was on a high, and then it came back crashing down, basically. However, I do think that this card is very good and will continue to be very good moving forward. Yes, it does get Cisu'd. It gets, 3-drop Cisu'd. It does get Brawled. It does get Medusa'd. But if your opponent doesn't have exactly the right out at the right time, and we saw this in the finals of the DLC, Perdita comes down, gets back a character right away. So instant value. Then if it survives, you likely just lose the game. If it's able to quest and get another card for free, you likely just lose the game. That's how powerful this card is when it goes off. So if you don't have Perditas and you plan to play Amber, I think that having this, similar to like Be Prepared, because you may or may not want to play them moving forward, given that, there are multiple checks for Be Prepared, like there are multiple checks for Perdita. I think just having them though, and seeing how the meta evolves, just in case you do need to slot these in, is potentially something you want to consider. Jafar, not much to say here. I do think that this card being at basically all-time lows is really good value. I picked up an extra foil copy. I don't know if I really want to try to go for a foil playset. What's interesting with this is, we know we're always going to get more draw cards, right? The thing that really holds this card back, in my opinion, is that really good shift target. Like, yeah, we've got the 2-cost Steel Jafar and the 4-cost Steel Jafar and a couple of Jafars that are not really that great in Amethyst. But to me, all it really takes for this card to really become like up there, especially within the Amethyst ink pairing, within Amethyst itself, I should say, not within an ink pairing. But the only thing we really need is that really good like 4-cost, 3-cost Jafar that has a really decent effect when it comes into play. And then this card instantly gets included into a lot of decks because there are a lot of cards that draw you cards. And this card coming down being a 4/5 evasive is potentially difficult to deal with. But the new Amethyst Chromacon item, let's say, exert it, you and your opponent draw a card, you gain a lore, and then you hardcast or sing a whole new world or something. So whatever card they drew off of the Chromacon, they just discard it. So it's just like free lore, free value for you. Then you gain 7 more lore off the Jafar, drawing 7 off of a whole new world. Like, there are a lot of interesting interactions that we might see with this card moving forward. So it's just something to keep an eye on now that it's at an all-time low. Rapunzel, I talked about this in my Amber Sapphire aggro ramp video. No idea how this card ever became less than $40. It is going for insane money in USD, though. That's crazy. Yeah, that's wild. I don't think it's worth that much money, but I think that like 40 Canadian, 45 Canadian, which is like, what, 35 to 40 USD, is probably where it should be. And to be fair, it is selling for around that. Well, this light plate for 45 each, dude. Wow. This guy got a deal, I guess, technically. I remember when this card was like, was it 28 Canadian at one point? I think I might be capping. was it? It was either 28 or 38. I remember because I remember I was at someone's house picking up Mufasa's, and if he watches this video, he'll know. And I showed him it because he needed one more Rapunzel for his playset for his master set of set 1. And I was showing him. I was like, "Oh yeah, if you need a Rapunzel, like I know the shop, and they have one there." And it was like either 28 or 38, because we know historically Rapunzel was always like insane amounts of money, and that's the lowest I think I've ever seen it. And of course, neither of us bought it at that point, so we both lost out on that there. We're almost coming to the end, guys. Jim Hawkins, I think, kind of falls off a little bit, as we've seen, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of location hate or location removal now in set 5. This card might come back into the meta, and there could be decks still built around this, but I just think right now Jim Hawkins isn't it. Potentially moving into set 5, he was looking pretty good until we saw all of those reveals that deal with locations. But yeah, I think Jim Hawkins continues to just fade out of the meta a little bit as locations go with it. Ursula, Deceiver of All, I think also, yeah, it's on an all-time low, basically. I think this card still represents great value for Emerald, and again, we'll only get better and better songs to sing on 3. But I think if you play Emerald, you can make a case to fit this into almost any Emerald deck. Emerald Amethyst, potentially. I mean, I know the Emerald Amethyst that plays the Amethyst 7-drop Ursula now, the shift target from Ursula's Return, basically the cover card, the set championship card, does not play this because it's anti-synergistic, but any other version of Emerald, I think, could afford to play this Ursula. Even Amber Emerald discard can afford to play this if you can fit it in. I prefer the Ariels, but like, this card is still great value as well. So keep an eye on this if you are interested in finally picking up a playset, because they were very expensive for a very long time and they are hitting all-time lows. Teeth and Ambitions, I think, is a card that continues to see play or go back up into the set 5 meta. And the main reason why did I say that this card was going to go up? Oh, Mim Elephant. Mim Elephant with this card is absolutely nuts, because this card being able to be sung or sang, sung is not a word, sang, is great value, first of all. And then putting 2 damage on something so that the Mim Elephant can move it the next turn will get you double value off this card. So not only do you put 2 damage on your opponent's card right away, if the Mim Elephant survives to the start of next turn, you're able to move that 2 damage to something else, which is really, really insane. Mufasa is a card a lot of people are high on. I think it's still good, but unfortunately, every time I try to build a Mufasa list, I'm always just like, but I want to play actions and items or there are just so many good, powerful items or actions or songs that I just want to put into a deck, and I'm like, but then it just makes Mufasa worse. And the problem with Mufasa is it's still a Gamba deck, right? You're still just like, well, I might reveal a 1-drop. And my friend was actually telling me he almost did really well with a Mufasa in the second set championship he did, but his Mufasa revealed a 1-drop that made him lose the game. If it would have revealed like anything else, I think he said he would have had enough lore to quest for game the next turn. And it's just like those kind of interactions, you're just like, right? And we've seen Mufasa decks not play 1-drops, but then you're really susceptible to aggro potentially. So I don't know. Mufasa's in a weird spot. I do think it's a very powerful card, but I think that it's going to continue to fluctuate. I don't see this card stabilizing anytime soon, just because it's so chaotic in the meta. Lucky Dime, similar to Tamatoa and Fishbone, is a Sapphire card. This card defines Sapphire right now along with Fishbone and Tamatoa. So I think this card is kind of where it's at. It probably just continues to go up if Sapphire remains a meta threat. And that's going to do it for our market watch. Let me know what you think in the comment section below if you made it this far. And also, if you did make it this far, I did mention that I wanted to do some kind of giveaway from my last market watch, and I never got around to it. Unfortunately, I still have the boxes of Ursula's Return on, just not organized even. So I haven't even had time to organize my stuff. But I do have a lot of extra stuff that I do just want to give away because I'm not going to use it. I just have 10 copies of certain cards, and I would like to give all of those stuff away to you guys, give back to the community. So I'm hoping to rearrange something like that soon. I just got to find the time. But if you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.